Judge Victoria Hayes had presided over military court for 12 years, sentencing over 500 soldiers with a reputation for unwavering fairness and strict adherence to military law. Her courtroom was considered the pinnacle of military justice, where careers were made or destroyed by her careful deliberation. But when investigators finally discovered the basement beneath her courthouse, they found something that would shatter everything the military thought they knew about justice. Victoria Hayes hadn't just been sentencing soldiers. She had been operating the most deadly tribunal in American history. Judge Victoria Hayes entered her courtroom at precisely 0800 hours every morning, just as she had for the past 12 years. Her black judicial robes were immaculate, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun that had become her trademark, and her steel-rimmed glasses reflected the fluorescent lights as she took her position behind the imposing mahogany bench that dominated the military courthouse at Fort Braxton. The courtroom itself was a monument to military precision and judicial authority. American flags flanked her bench, military seals adorned the walls, and the witness stand bore the inscription that had guided Victoria's entire career: equal justice under law. Every detail had been carefully maintained to project the dignity and gravitas that military justice demanded. Victoria's reputation within the military legal system was beyond reproach. She was known for her meticulous attention to legal precedent, her unwavering commitment to due process, and her ability to render decisions that were both legally sound and strategically wise for military readiness. Defense attorneys respected her fairness, prosecutors valued her consistency, and commanding officers trusted her judgment on matters that could affect unit cohesion and operational security. Which city in the world are you watching this video from today? Please subscribe and support us for more stories. The morning docket contained the usual array of military infractions: absent without leave, charges against a young private who had missed formation after a family emergency, insubordination allegations against a sergeant who had challenged orders he believed were tactically unsound, a complex case involving potential misuse of government equipment that required careful interpretation of military regulations. Victoria approached each case with the same methodical professionalism that had characterized her entire judicial career. She listened carefully to testimony, asked pointed questions when clarification was needed, and rendered decisions based on established military law and precedent. Her sentences were proportionate, her reasoning was clear, and her commitment to justice was absolute. But what nobody in that courtroom understood was that Judge Victoria Hayes was serving two different forms of justice. The transformation had begun 4 years earlier, when Victoria received an after-hours visit from a man who identified himself only as Director Walsh. He represented what he described as a special oversight committee that monitored military personnel who posed security risks that fell outside the scope of conventional military justice. Walsh had presented Victoria with classified files detailing cases that would never appear in any official court system. Soldiers who had been recruited by foreign intelligence services, military personnel who had been compromised through financial pressure or ideological manipulation, officers who possessed classified information and had demonstrated behavior patterns that suggested potential betrayal. These individuals, Walsh explained, represented threats to national security that were too sensitive for conventional prosecution. Public trials would expose intelligence operations, compromise ongoing investigations, and potentially reveal vulnerabilities that hostile nations could exploit. The traditional military justice system, with its emphasis on transparency and due process, was insufficient for addressing threats that required absolute secrecy. Victoria had initially rejected the proposal outright. Her commitment to constitutional law and military justice was unwavering, and the suggestion that she participate in any system that circumvented established legal procedures was fundamentally contrary to everything she believed about judicial responsibility. But Walsh had been prepared for her resistance. He presented evidence of security breaches that had resulted from conventional prosecutions, classified intelligence that demonstrated the scope of foreign infiltration within military ranks, and projections showing how traditional judicial processes were inadequate for protecting national security in an era of sophisticated intelligence warfare. More persuasively, Walsh had shown Victoria files detailing specific cases where conventional prosecution had been impossible due to the classified nature of evidence, allowing dangerous individuals to remain in positions where they could continue compromising national security. Soldiers suspected of espionage had been transferred rather than prosecuted because evidence against them was too sensitive for public disclosure. Military personnel with ties to terrorist organizations had received administrative punishments because their activities couldn't be proven in open court without exposing intelligence sources. The proposal Walsh presented was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its implications. Victoria would continue her regular judicial duties exactly as before, maintaining her reputation for fairness and legal expertise. But she would also preside over a second tribunal that operated under different rules, with different objectives, and with outcomes that served national security rather than individual justice. The basement tribunal had been constructed during a routine courthouse renovation project. Official blueprints showed the space as additional storage and mechanical rooms, but the actual construction had created a fully functional courtroom equipped with soundproofing, recording equipment, and holding facilities that met the specialized requirements of classified proceedings. Victoria's first basement case had involved a military intelligence analyst who had been providing classified information to contacts with suspected ties to hostile foreign governments. The evidence against him was overwhelming, but had been gathered through surveillance methods that couldn't be disclosed without compromising ongoing operations against other suspected operatives. In conventional military court, the case would have been dismissed due to the inability to present evidence without exposing intelligence sources. The analyst would have received an administrative discharge and continued his espionage activities in civilian settings where oversight was more difficult. In Victoria's basement tribunal, the case was decided based on classified evidence that couldn't be challenged or cross-examined. The defendant had no legal representation, no right to appeal, and no knowledge that he was being tried for his life. The sentence was carried out immediately after Victoria rendered her verdict. Over 4 years, Victoria had presided over 27 basement cases. Each defendant had been someone who posed a security threat that couldn't be addressed through conventional prosecution. Each case had involved evidence that was too classified for public disclosure. Each sentence had been the same. Victoria had convinced herself that her basement tribunal was serving a higher form of justice than her regular courtroom. Traditional military law was bound by constitutional protections that, while essential for protecting innocent individuals, also created vulnerabilities that enemies of the state could exploit. Her secret court served the greater good by eliminating threats that conventional justice couldn't address. The psychological compartmentalization required to maintain both roles simultaneously had been extraordinary. Victoria had developed elaborate mental processes for separating her two judicial identities. During regular court hours, she was the exemplary military judge who upheld constitutional principles with unwavering dedication. After hours, she became something else entirely. The defendants who appeared in her basement tribunal were never informed they were being tried. They believed they were participating in routine security interviews or administrative procedures. The proceedings were conducted with the same formal structure as regular court, but without defense attorneys, public observers, or any of the protections that defined legitimate judicial process. Victoria had justified this deception by convincing herself that these individuals had forfeited their rights to due process through their betrayal of national security. They had chosen to operate outside the bounds of law and loyalty, so they no longer deserved the protections that law provided to legitimate citizens and soldiers. The evidence presented in basement cases was always compelling because it didn't have to meet the standards required for conventional prosecution. Surveillance recordings, intercepted communications, financial records, and behavioral assessments that would be inadmissible in regular court became the foundation for life and death decisions in Victoria's secret tribunal. Each basement sentence was carried out within hours of being rendered. The defendants simply disappeared from their duties, their absence explained through fictional transfers, medical emergencies, or family situations that required immediate attention. Their names were removed from military records through administrative processes that left no trace of their actual fate. Victoria had never personally witnessed the executions that followed her basement verdicts. That responsibility was handled by other members of Walsh's organization, using methods that ensured complete discretion and left no forensic evidence. Victoria's role was limited to rendering judicial decisions based on the classified evidence presented to her secret tribunal. But the psychological toll of serving as both a legitimate judge and a secret executioner had been enormous. Victoria had developed elaborate rationalization systems for maintaining her dual identity, but the contradictions between her two roles had created internal conflicts that affected every aspect of her life. She had become increasingly isolated from colleagues who might question her activities or notice changes in her behavior. Her personal relationships had suffered as she struggled to maintain emotional connections while harboring secrets that would destroy her if discovered. She had developed insomnia, anxiety disorders, and periods of dissociation that made it difficult to distinguish between her legitimate judicial work and her secret tribunal activities. The investigation that would ultimately expose Victoria's basement tribunal began when military intelligence noticed patterns in personnel disappearances that couldn't be explained by routine transfers or resignations. Statistical analysis revealed that individuals with access to classified information were vanishing at rates that exceeded normal attrition, and that these disappearances correlated with security investigations that had been terminated without resolution. The investigation was complicated by the fact that many of the missing personnel had indeed been under suspicion for security violations, making their disappearances appear to be logical responses to being discovered, rather than evidence of systematic elimination. But the patterns were too consistent and too widespread to be explained by coincidence. Military investigators began focusing on common factors among the missing personnel. Geographic location, security clearance levels, types of suspected violations, and timing of disappearances were analyzed to identify potential connections. The analysis eventually revealed that Fort Braxton had experienced an unusually high rate of personnel disappearances among individuals who had been subjects of security investigations. More specifically, the analysis showed that individuals who had been called for what they believed were routine security interviews at the Fort Braxton courthouse had subsequently vanished at rates that were statistically impossible to explain through normal causes. The investigators obtained warrants to examine courthouse records, including architectural plans, security footage, and access logs that might explain how the building was being used for purposes beyond its official judicial functions. The examination revealed discrepancies between official blueprints and the actual structure of the basement levels. Physical investigation of the basement areas revealed a hidden entrance concealed behind what appeared to be maintenance equipment. The entrance led to a fully operational courtroom that bore no resemblance to any legitimate judicial facility. The space contained holding cells, recording equipment, and execution facilities that had been used to carry out the sentences rendered in Victoria's secret tribunal. Forensic analysis of the hidden courtroom revealed evidence of multiple deaths, including DNA traces from dozens of missing military personnel. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, providing proof that the Fort Braxton courthouse had been the site of systematic executions disguised as judicial proceedings. Victoria Hayes was arrested during a regular court session, taken into custody while presiding over a routine case involving unauthorized absence charges. The irony was not lost on investigators that she was arrested while performing her legitimate judicial duties, the same duties that had provided cover for her secret tribunal activities. The interrogation that followed revealed the full scope of Victoria's basement tribunal and the organization that had recruited her to operate it. Victoria provided detailed information about her recruitment, training, and the 107 cases she had decided during 4 years of secret operations. The psychological evaluation conducted during Victoria's detention identified her as having developed a severe dissociative disorder that had allowed her to compartmentalize her conflicting roles as both a legitimate judge and a secret executioner. She had maintained two completely separate identities that operated independently, each serving different masters and different concepts of justice. Victoria's case represented a catastrophic failure of military oversight systems that were designed to prevent the type of unauthorized operations she had been conducting. Her reputation for integrity and legal expertise had made her above suspicion, while her access to courthouse facilities had provided the perfect cover for establishing a secret tribunal. The investigation into Victoria's network led to arrests and prosecutions of numerous individuals who had been involved in recruiting, directing, and supporting her basement tribunal operations. Director Walsh and his entire organization were exposed as a rogue intelligence operation that had been conducting unauthorized executions under the guise of protecting national security. Judge Victoria Hayes was convicted of multiple counts of murder, conspiracy, and violations of constitutional rights. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a sentence that reflected both the severity of her crimes and the betrayal of judicial trust that her actions represented. The military implemented comprehensive reforms to courthouse security and judicial oversight following Victoria's conviction, including measures designed to prevent similar unauthorized operations and to ensure that all judicial proceedings were conducted according to established legal procedures. But the psychological impact of Victoria's betrayal continued to affect military personnel who had trusted the judicial system she had corrupted. The revelation that their most respected judge had been operating a secret execution tribunal created lasting damage to confidence in military justice and institutional integrity. Victoria's basement courtroom was sealed and converted into a memorial for the 27 individuals who had been executed there. Their names were engraved on a wall that served as a permanent reminder of the consequences of abandoning constitutional principles in favor of expedient solutions to complex security challenges. Years later, military investigators continued to discover the full extent of the damage caused by Victoria's basement tribunal. The individuals she had executed had included some who were actually innocent of the charges that led to their deaths. Victims of flawed intelligence or deliberate misinformation that had been accepted without the scrutiny that legitimate judicial proceedings would have provided. Victoria Hayes remained in federal prison, serving multiple life sentences with no possibility of release. Prison officials noted that she continued to display the same dissociative symptoms that had allowed her to maintain her dual identity as both judge and executioner, sometimes referring to her basement tribunal as if it had been a legitimate judicial function. The case of Judge Victoria Hayes became a classified study in the dangers of abandoning constitutional protections in favor of expedient solutions to national security challenges. Her story served as a cautionary tale about the potential for trusted individuals to abuse judicial authority when oversight systems failed to detect unauthorized operations. The military legal system that Victoria had served and betrayed eventually recovered from the scandal of her secret tribunal, but her case remained a permanent reminder that justice without due process was not justice at all, but simply authorized murder disguised as judicial procedure. The basement beneath the Fort Braxton courthouse stood empty now, its hidden courtroom serving as a monument to the 257 individuals who had died there, and as a warning about the dangers of allowing justice to be administered in darkness rather than in the light of constitutional law. Judge Victoria Hayes had spent 12 years serving two forms of justice. One had upheld the principles that protected individual rights and maintained public trust in judicial institutions. The other had abandoned those principles in favor of expedient solutions that ultimately served no one except those who preferred to operate outside the bounds of law and accountability. In the end, her legacy was not the 500 legitimate sentences she had rendered in open court, but the 27 secret executions she had carried out in a basement tribunal that represented everything justice was never meant to be.